Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. All right, so we're back on the record. Does the state have another witness, Mr. Bell?
Yes, Your Honor. State Patrol Officer Brian Brelo.
Sir, please stop there and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear you will testify to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Thank you.
All right. Please have a seat there, and please speak on the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you. Sir, could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, it's Brian Sabolik, last name spelled Sabolik.
Are you employed, sir?
I am.
And with whom?
City of Cleveland Division of Police.
You're a police officer.
I am.
And how long have you been a police officer?
For 3 years.
Okay. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the West Park neighborhood.
High school?
St. Ignatius.
Did you recently come back from a trip?
I did.
What was that about?
I'm a rugby coach for St. Ignatius High School, and we took the kids to Ireland.
So you just got back from Ireland?
Correct.
Last night?
2 nights ago.
Okay, so your time zone okay?
Still a little off.
All right. Now, sir, were you hired by the city of Cleveland and then laid off?
I was.
Could you explain that in court? Those dates?
I don't recall the exact dates, so forgive me if I forget them, but I was hired January 10th of 2011 and laid off June 24th of 2011, immediately after my graduation. I was rehired July 9th of 2012.
And sir, so when did you actually start full-time?
July 9th, 2012.
Okay. And could you explain to the court what happens with rookies as they come on the stand?
I'm sorry?
Could you explain to the court rookies when they come on to the force, I should say? I'm sorry.
That was a little confusing.
Right, I misspoke because I'm thinking about something else.
They go through 6 months of probation.
Okay, and what happens during that 6 months?
You're assigned a field training officer who oversees the work that you do.
And those are commonly known as FTOs?
FTOs.
Okay, and you...
Over 6 months, you should, at least the program when I was going through, you should have 6 FTOs. You have 1 a month.
Okay.
The program has since changed.
And sir, how old are you?
I'm 32.
Okay. And in November of 2012, were you working that month?
I was.
So if you started in July, you're 4 or 5 months into your probation period.
I was at the end of my 5th month.
Okay. And were you working on the night of November 29, 2012?
I was.
And who was your FTO at that point?
Michael Farley.
Okay, and how long had you been with him?
We were at the end of his month training me, so it had been 1 month at that point.
Okay. And did there come a point in time where you were involved in this chase?
There was.
Could you explain to the court how that came about?
Farley and I had requested our lunch. We were at the 2nd District. He was down in the gymnasium working out. I was in our roll call room eating lunch. We overheard the chase begin on radio. Eventually, Farley had come upstairs and asked me if I wanted to join the pursuit.
Okay, so I want to back up a little bit. You were at the station house.
Correct.
Which station? Which district?
2nd District.
Eating your lunch.
Correct.
And your FTO was down in the gym?
Working out, correct.
And before you went into the station to start eating your lunch, did you hear about the chase on your radios?
I don't recall exactly.
When you were eating your lunch upstairs, were you able to monitor the chase at all?
I was.
And how did you do that?
I did it through my personal radio.
So when you're eating your lunch by yourself, well, whoever you were with, you're able to listen to the chase?
Correct.
Were you eating lunch with anybody else at that point?
There were two other people in the room. I don't recall who they were.
Two other officers?
Correct.
And would it be safe to say that everybody's attention was towards this chase at that point?
It would.
These don't happen very often. Would you agree with me on that?
I would agree.
Okay. And you said your FTO, and this is Officer Farley, correct?
Correct.
Came up to where you were at
Yes.
when you requested whether you want to get in the chase or not?
Correct.
What was your response?
I said to him by the time we would arrive there, the chase would be called off.
And
And there was no point.
then what happened?
He asked me again if I wanted to join the chase, and I said, let's go.
Okay. All right. And what happened?
We ran out to our car and immediately went in the direction that the last broadcast had been given from, where their location was.
And do you remember the route that you took to get up to the chase?
I do not.
Did that route include being on the freeway?
It did. I do recall being on I-90.
And who was driving?
Farley was Officer Farley.
Okay. And did you at some point catch up to the chase, so to speak?
Eventually we started seeing cars.
And where was that at, if you know?
I remember getting off at East 72nd. By the time we had gotten off there, we started to see more and more Cleveland police cars.
Now, you're a West Sider, correct?
Correct.
Second District's on the West Side, right?
Correct.
Are you familiar with East Side that much?
Not really at all.
So when you got off 72nd, were you familiar with the roads and where you were at?
No, I wasn't.
And by the way, what time of day or night was this?
I don't recall the exact time. We generally took our lunch about 10 o'clock, maybe a little after.
PM.
PM, correct.
So this was at night.
Correct.
Okay. Now you said you caught up to a number of cars.
Correct.
Were those CPD cars, or did you see any other cars from any other agency at that point?
All I saw were CPD cars. I don't recall the exact number.
And did you have your lights and siren on?
We did.
And the cars that you came up with, did they have their lights and sirens on?
They did.
Okay. And so what happened when you caught up to these cars after getting off at 72nd?
We weren't, like I said, we weren't familiar with the area, so we weren't sure on the route we were going to take. Officer Farley ended up seeing a 3rd District car. We assumed they knew where they were going, so we decided to follow the 3rd District car.
Okay. And could you tell us the maximum amount of speed you were going at?
I have no idea.
Well, could you tell the court, was it slow, medium, fast? I mean...
Well, you go fast on the highway, so I assume we were going fast, but...
Well, you needed to catch up to the chase, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When you were trying to catch up to the chase, were any other CPD cars doing the same thing you guys were doing?
I don't recall.
Okay. All right. And so you catch up to some 3rd District CPD cars, correct?
Correct.
Do you know where that was?
I don't.
And did you follow them?
We did.
Approximately how long did you follow them?
I don't remember.
Okay. Could you tell us how many cars were in front of you?
At that time, when we were following the 3rd District car, that was the only car.
Okay. At some point in time, you caught up to a number of other cars.
We did see a number of other cars. I don't recall what street we were on, and I don't recall the number of cars.
Okay. Do you know you familiar with Euclid Avenue?
I am now. I wasn't at the time.
Okay. At that point in time, did you get up to a main street?
We did.
At that point in time, did you see any other cars at that point?
I did, but I don't recall the exact number.
It would be suffice to say numerous?
I guess it depends on what your definition of
More
numerous is.
More than 10?
No, I wouldn't say more than 10.
From what you're seeing, correct? What's in front of you?
Right.
Okay. So what happened? Tell us what happened.
We saw a few cars turn right onto a side street. That was the one street that I do recall seeing the street sign for, and it was Wymore.
Okay.
At that point, once we were on Wymore, I couldn't really see too well in front of us. All I could see were the lights flashing from the car in front of us. The road was, I don't recall if they were doing construction, but it was very dirty and a lot of dust was being kicked up. So all I could see was the lights from the vehicle in front of us.
So it was a little difficult for you to see what was going on at that point?
Correct.
Were you familiar with this area?
Not at all.
Okay. Are you behind any cars at that point?
Just the car that I could see in front of us. That was it.
And let's back up a little bit. When you were going through to catch up to the chase or got behind that 3rd District car after 72nd, were you hearing the broadcasts?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the nature of those broadcasts?
What were the initial
Whatever you
broadcasts?
heard. What was you heard?
I mean, it was quite a few broadcasts. So.
Okay. Well, tell us what they were saying.
I recall them saying that the initial broadcast was that shots were fired. I remember
Shots were fired where?
downtown.
At anybody in particular?
It was Officer Nan who was broadcasting it. He has a pretty distinctive voice. You know when he's
know Officer
broadcasting.
Nan?
I do.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear anyone.
I'm sorry.
I said he has a pretty distinctive voice, so you know when he's talking over radio.
Okay, and so at that point, sir, you heard that there were shots at a police officer.
Correct.
And being a rookie, you knew at that point that was pretty high priority, didn't you not?
Absolutely.
And when you're going through the in your car before you got up to Wymore, could you describe what you were feeling emotionally?
Emotionally, I was scared. My adrenaline was going. I just was very, very nervous.
And how about your FTO? Did you notice anything with him?
No, I didn't notice anything.
Did you have any conversations about this when you were in your car before you got to Wymore? Like, hey, I'm a little excited here, you know. How do you deal with it? Anything like that?
I don't remember. I'm sure we did, but I don't remember what we said.
Okay. He didn't try to calm you down or anything like that? Or?
No, not that I recall.
Okay. Had you been in any chases previously before this?
We were involved in, I want to say Officer Farley and myself were involved in a chase. So it was very, very brief. Another one of my FTOs and I were involved in a very brief chase, but.
What do you mean by brief?
15 seconds, maybe 10, like just very, very brief. Car takes off from us. When we try and stop it, we pursue it. It ends up either somebody bails out of the car or a boss ends up, a supervisor ends up calling off the chase, the pursuit.
So the one, you were in one that we're talking about?
I was in two.
Two? Both very brief?
Not counting this one.
Right.
And both of those were very brief.
And the people bailed out at that point?
Yes.
Did you catch them?
No.
Aren't you kind of fast?
Not as fast as I used to be.
Okay. All right. Sir, these brief chases, you said your supervisors called them off
Correct.
after 10 or 15 seconds?
Correct.
So we're up to Wymore at this point.
Correct.
You indicated there's dust and lights, you can't really see that much. Explain to the court what happened when you pulled into Wymore.
I believe I already did. When we pulled into Wymore, the dirt started getting kicked up. The only thing that I could see was the CPD car in front of us, and the only reason I could see that was because of the lighting, the lights coming off the car.
Off the car in front of you?
The car, the overhead lights.
Okay.
Those were the only thing that I could see.
So then what happened?
So we continued down Wymore. We ended up making a right-hand turn into the parking lot for the school.
Did you know it was a school at that point?
I did not. I did hear a radio broadcast saying that they pulled into, I believe they said it was a power plant parking lot and that it was a dead end, so they would have to swing back around.
So at that moment, did you, based upon that broadcast, that you knew that, for lack of a better word, they were trapped, they could not get out?
I didn't know that for sure.
Okay. That's just, you heard that over
I heard it over the radio. Again, I was unfamiliar with that area, so I didn't know that as a fact.
So what happened as you pulled into the parking lot of this facility, whatever it is at that point?
As soon as we pulled into the parking lot, we began hearing gunshots.
Okay. All right. Were you still in your car at that point?
I was.
All right. And what did you do?
Well, Officer Farley, who was driving, stopped the car. We heard the gunshots. We heard the gunshots initially, then Farley stopped the car. As soon as Farley stopped the car, I ducked down like this to try and get behind the engine block, because that's the way we were trained in the academy, was you want to be behind something that can absorb gunshots when you're being shot at, so that the gunshots don't come through and hit you.
So engine block would accomplish
So the engine block would accomplish that. So I tried to duck down behind the engine block. I saw Officer Farley get out of the vehicle, and then I remembered from my training in the academy, they always told us, get out of the vehicle, it's a coffin, you have nowhere to go, get out of there. So, that's what I did. I opened my door and I got out of the car.
At that point, when you first pulled in and you heard these gunshots, did you feel that you were being shot at?
I did. I absolutely did.
And when you exited the car, did you feel that you were being shot at?
I did, and I felt like I was directly in the line of fire.
Okay. And sir, what did you do after that?
After I exited the vehicle, I observed the windshield. I observed the vehicle, the suspect vehicle, the Malibu, was into one. It had ran into one of our zone cars. I observed
Let's back up. Did you see the impact of that?
I did not see the impact, but I did see the cars against each other.
Judge, if you need to have a witness come down for witness.
Sure, that's fine.
Sir, by the way, what car were you driving that night?
232.
Okay, and what kind of car is that?
It was a Crown Victoria.
Okay. So I'd like you to place, and by the way, this model here, does it kind of represent the area that you remember that night?
I can speak for this part of it,
Right.
but I can't speak for anything back beyond Malibu.
Okay, from the Malibu to here, that kind of seems like it's what you remember?
Yes.
Could you please place your car where Officer Farley stopped? Right there. So what distance were you between this set of cars and here?
I would say about 40 to 50 feet.
Okay, and you opened your door?
Correct.
And you proceeded, here, let me get one of these people here. You got out of the car, and where did you go?
Initially, when I got out of the car, I fired 2 rounds here, and then I came around the rear of our vehicle and got down behind the engine block right there.
Was anybody there with you?
Officer Farley was right next to me.
So Officer Farley was here?
Correct.
Okay, when you exited the car, you said you fired 2 rounds.
Correct.
Could you show the court what you did when you were backing up?
Well, as I exited the vehicle, I had my weapon drawn like so, and I was backpedaling, keeping my sight on the suspect car, backpedaling like this, moving towards the rear of the vehicle.
And what were you aiming at?
I was aiming at the driver.
Okay. Could you see from here, could you see anybody inside the car from there?
I could see two shapes. I couldn't see distinct. I saw 2 figures, and there were numerous bullet holes in the driver's side from what I saw.
So would it be fair to say the windshield was a little spiderwebbed at that point?
Yes.
And again, shots were going off at this point.
Correct.
So when you first got here and you backed up, made your shots and came around here, how long do you think it took you to do that?
A few seconds.
Okay. When you got to here, what was your partner doing?
He was, we were both hunkered down behind the engine block.
Okay. And how long did you stay here?
I don't recall the exact amount of time.
Was it short?
Yes.
Did Officer Farley, did you see him discharge his weapon when he was behind the car here?
I did not.
Okay. Then what happened?
I came up, I stood up a little bit behind the engine block. I pointed my weapon at the driver of the vehicle again and fired 2 more rounds.
Where was your partner at this point?
I don't recall where he was at that point.
Did he leave from where you were at?
Eventually, I noticed that he was no longer standing there, but at that point, I don't know where he was.
So when you fired those other 2 shots, you don't know where Officer Farley was at
I
that point?
don't.
Okay. So you fired 2 shots, and again, this is still when shots are ringing out.
Yes.
Gunfire has not stopped yet.
No.
Okay. Then what happens?
I noticed, after I fire my 2 shots, I noticed that there's someone standing on the hood of the Malibu, and I have to quit firing because they're directly in my...
Okay. If I place this guy here, is that about where you saw somebody?
More or less.
Okay. So were you moving up at this point, or were you standing here when you saw this individual stand on the hood?
At that point, I was still behind our zone car, behind the engine,
And why did you stop shooting?
because I didn't want to hit that person who was on the hood of the car.
And when you stopped shooting, did the rest of the gunfire stop?
I believe it was still going on.
Okay. So when you see this individual on the hood, and you were about to fire, you stopped firing, but your testimony is gunshots are still ringing out?
As far as I remember,
Did you recognize who was on top of the trunk there?
not at that point, I didn't.
Did you see anybody on the hood of this vehicle?
I did not.
Did you see anybody, well, let me ask you this. Did you see any other police officers around this scene? Right here.
I don't recall, at that point, when I stopped firing, I don't recall seeing anybody other than that one person. I do recall, after a little bit, seeing that Farley had moved up to the zone car that was struck by the suspect car.
Which car?
238, the one that was that one.
Right here.
He had moved up to the rear of it.
So Officer Farley was here then?
I don't recall exactly where he was,
Right.
but more or less he was in that area.
Okay. When did the firing stop?
I don't recall when it stopped.
Sir, this individual that you saw on the hood of the car, what was he doing?
Initially, when I saw him, he was firing down.
Could you demonstrate to the court what you saw?
He was standing on the hood, firing down. So
Okay. Was he in the middle of the hood?
I don't recall exactly.
On the
where
sides of the hood?
I don't recall exactly where it was.
Okay. Could you hear his shots?
I don't recall. It's very spotty.
Okay. But you saw him firing down into the hood.
Correct.
How long was he firing down into the hood?
I saw him for a brief second when I was firing. I looked up, he was on my line of sight. I stopped firing, and then I moved up because I saw Farley had moved up, so I moved up.
So you were here,
Correct.
popped up,
Correct.
shot 2 rounds,
Correct.
popped up again, about to shoot.
Correct.
That you see somebody on the hood.
Correct.
And at that point, Farley's up over here, somewhere in this area.
Correct.
And then you start to move
I
up.
start to move up as well.
Did you still have your gun drawn?
I did.
As you left the cover of this car, were the shots still ringing out?
I don't recall.
what did you do next?
I moved up to the rear of zone car 238.
Was your gun still drawn?
It was drawn, but it wasn't pointed at. I had it off to the side.
Okay, so you got up to here?
Correct. I was actually right behind the bumper.
Here?
Correct.
Okay.
And at that point, my gun was drawn and pointed at the driver of the Malibu.
What happened to the individual on the hood?
He was no longer there.
So you saw him here, correct?
Correct.
And you're saying it's about 30, 40 feet away.
Correct.
What was the lighting like?
I mean, I didn't have a problem seeing him. It was dark. It was a lighted roadway.
Did you see, at any point in time, any movement of the individuals inside this Malibu?
I did not.
So what you're saying, by the time you came up here, this individual's gone.
Correct.
Now, this individual, was he a police officer?
At the time, I knew he was a police officer, but I didn't know who he was.
Because he had his, was he in full uniform, and you can
Yes.
see the blue?
Yes.
And that's why you stopped.
Yes.
Because if you'd have continued shooting, he was in your line of fire.
Correct.
Is that what you stated? Okay, so you can get back on the stand. Thank you. Sir, do you remember, sir, do you remember giving a statement to the BCI?
I do.
Okay, and sir, do you remember talking to Agent Soraya that's sitting over there? Do you recognize him?
I do remember talking to him. It's been a while. It's been about 2.5 years. So,
And sir, if would reviewing your statement refresh your recollection as to when the shooting stopped?
it would.
Sir, we'll give you what's been transcribed, page 25, gentlemen, of the DCI interview. If you would review that for a second, sir.
What I said in this was when I had made it up to zone car 238. By that time, the shooting had stopped.
Okay, the question here is, so primarily the way you recall is a guy jumps on top, he shoots inside, and then everything stops. That's really the last thing I remember at that point.
Was being behind zone car 238.
Okay. Where does it say here that you're behind zone car 238?
It says, I'm not too sure. I want to say I made my way up to behind this car.
And this car,
and I was pointing at a diagram of zone, which had zone car 238 on it.
Okay, could we please put up that diagram? So, the question being, the way you recall is, guy jumps up top, he shoots inside, and then everything stops. Is that correct?
That's what I said in my BCI statement.
And is that what you're testifying today? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's go, we're right at the point now where you're up here with Officer Farley behind the bumper. All the shooting is stopped, correct?
Correct.
What happens next?
I don't recall the next. I remember having my weapon drawn, ducked down behind the bumper of zone car 238. I had my weapon drawn, pointed at the driver of the Malibu, and that's the last thing I remember until we were all standing off to the side.
Which side?
To the side in that brown area.
Playground?
The playground. We were standing in the playground. That's the next thing I remember.
When you were here, did you hear anybody else cease fire?
I did not.
When you were moving up, did you hear anybody else cease fire?
I did not.
At any point in time, did you hear anybody else cease fire?
I did not.
Now, sir, you and Officer Farley over here, correct?
Correct.
And then the next thing you remember, you're standing over here.
Correct.
You don't remember walking from here to over here.
I do not.
Okay. And who was over in this area? Is anybody else over in this area?
There were quite a few police officers over there. I couldn't give you an exact number, but there were quite a few.
Did you have a conversation with Officer Farley, right, at any point in time after the shooting?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with anybody right after the shooting?
I don't recall.
Do you know an individual named Carl Dooley?
I do.
Does that refresh your recollection?
That was after, you said immediately after the shooting. Once we had been off to the side, I was standing next to Officer Dooley. Officer Dooley was to be my FTO for my final month.
And what did you say to him?
I said, I'm sorry, I guess we're not going to be working together. And he put out his hand and he said, that's okay. And he shook my hand and he said, why are you shaking so much? And I kind of chuckled a little bit and said, were you just here? We were just in a shootout. And he said, it's okay. And he kind of tapped me on the shoulder.
So, clearly by your demeanor now, this was a very upsetting situation for you.
I was shaking, and I don't remember shaking, but obviously Officer Dooley saw that I was shaking, that my hand was shaking quite a bit.
Do you believe that how you acted from here to here, up to here, was consistent with what your training was?
I do.
Okay. And are you not trained for stressful situations like this?
I don't know how you can train for a situation like this. I mean, we're trained for situations, but I don't know how you can be trained for something like this.
Well, maybe that was the wrong word. You're trained to confront dangerous situations as a police officer.
We were.
Okay. That's why you have a gun and you learn use of force and all that stuff, correct?
Correct.
So, sir, do you know how much time, so immediately, let's go immediately right after the shooting and you're behind the bumper. You don't remember talking to anybody, correct?
Correct.
Next thing you know, you're in the playground area.
Correct.
Is anybody else with you in the playground area?
There were a number of officers over there. At some point, I was standing next to Farley, but I don't recall the other officers that were there other than Farley and Dooley.
Were there any conversations going on between all the other officers at that point?
I don't recall.
How about you? Do you recall talking to anybody?
I recall talking to Farley, but I don't recall what was said.
Let me ask you this. At any point in time, did you check if you were hit?
I did. At one point, I remember physically inspecting my vest like this to see if I had been shot.
So this all happened when going on into your 5th month on the job.
Correct.
All right. So you're standing over here with a number of individuals. Let me show you marked for identification purposes, the state's exhibit.
Judge, it's State's Exhibit 1197, Attachment O, 1231.
Sir, I'm looking, can you see that picture?
I can.
And you see the Malibu and the cruiser right here, correct?
Correct.
And you see all the officers back there. Is that the area you're talking about?
I don't know exactly where that area is, but I'm guessing it's probably the same area that I'm talking about.
How many police officers were you standing with approximately after the shooting over there?
I have no idea. It was quite a few.
Right, you can look at this picture and there's a lot of police officers there, correct?
Correct.
Does that kind of reflect the number of police officers on the scene at that time?
I would say so.
And so you're standing there. How long were you standing there?
I don't recall the exact amount of time.
And you don't recall having any conversations with anybody?
I do not.
Were you still nervous, excited, upset at that point?
I would say all of the above. Very, very, very nervous. I don't think it had set in yet what exactly had just happened.
Okay, and you didn't confide in anybody at that point as far as how you were feeling and your fellow officers?
No, I'm a very stoic person.
Okay. What nationality?
Slovak and Irish.
So how long were you standing there at the playground?
I don't recall time. I don't wear a watch, and my phone was inside our zone car. That was the only way I'm ever able to check time.
Sir, if I could go back for a second, the court's indulgence, if you could come off the stand again, sir. I just want to make sure that the court is aware because you saw this. If you could come off so you have some room. The individual you saw on the hood, could you give that position again? How far were her legs apart, do you know? Okay. So you just recall somebody just in this type of position? Yes. Okay. And he was pointing downward?
Correct.
And shooting where?
Downward.
Into what?
I would assume, I don't know what he was shooting at, but I would assume down into the vehicle.
Into the windshield?
I would assume so.
Okay. That's where everybody's attention was, correct? This now.
Well, I can't speak for everybody else.
Well, nobody was shooting this way, were they?
I can only speak for myself.
Okay. This individual was pointing downward shooting.
Correct.
You don't think he was shooting at the hood, do you?
I don't know. He was pointing downward shooting. That's what I saw.
Okay, but you're here like this, and you can't tell us how far his legs were apart?
No.
You can't tell us exactly where on the hood he was?
No.
In the middle or to the sides?
No.
You just saw a figure on the hood like this?
Correct.
And you were 30 to 40 feet away?
Correct.
And you had a good shot at him?
Initially.
Okay. And how long did you see him up on that hood?
Like I said before, the amount of time that it took me to get from this position to this position, he was gone somewhere in between that time. I saw him after firing 2 rounds, and then I never saw him again.
So how long would that be?
I have no idea.
Were you running up
Yes.
with your gun drawn?
Gun was out. I don't know that it was pointed at the male who was
Were you running like this with your gun down at your side? Or were you coming up with a gun?
I might have been. I really don't remember. I just remember being behind the zone car for 238.
All right. Thank you, sir. And just for the record, so the record is clear, he had 2 hands on the gun pointing down.
Correct.
So you're at the playground. Do you know how long you were there?
I do not.
And you don't recall talking to anybody?
No.
You don't recall anybody talking to you?
Other than Officer Dooley.
That's the only thing that sticks out in your mind right now because your hand was shaking.
Correct.
Did you notice your hand shaking when you fired your shots?
I did not.
Okay, so how long were you at the playground?
Again, I have no idea. I don't wear a watch, and my phone was in the zone car.
Okay. Where did you go after? Well, let me ask this. Could you describe the mood, the atmosphere after all the shooting had stopped and you guys were all sitting in the...
It was very quiet.
Okay. Then what happened?
Eventually, one of the supervisors said, we need to separate the shooters from the non-shooters.
Okay.
And the shooters were sectioned off into an area on the playground, and everybody else that hadn't fired was sectioned off into another area.
So everybody got separated.
Correct.
Do you know how many shooters there were?
At that point, I did not.
Okay. Were you standing in a group of shooters?
I was.
And was your FTO one of those individuals?
He was.
Okay. Then what happened?
Actually, may I interrupt for a moment?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Go
Just
ahead,
the
Judge,
flow of
please.
your direct. You said that shooters and non-shooters were separated. How was that determined? In other words, did the supervisors say, hey, who shot their gun or something?
Yes.
All right, and you must have said, I did,
Yes.
and whoever else was in the circle with you must have said they did.
I assume so. I know that I was asked if I had, and I said yes.
Okay, but, pardon my
No,
interruption.
Judge, jump in anytime. So what happened after this separation?
Once we were separated, we remained on the playground for a period of time. Again, I don't recall the amount of time, but eventually we were moved into Heritage Middle School.
The school itself?
Correct, the school itself.
Everybody?
I don't recall exactly. I know the shooters for sure were all moved inside. It was a cold night and they wanted to get us inside.
So all the shooters went inside the middle school?
And there were others that were not shooters, but I don't recall exactly who.
Where in the middle school did you go?
We were right inside the front doorway. I don't recall if they were classrooms or offices, but we were standing, there's a main hallway right when you go in the middle school. We were standing in that hallway.
Everybody was standing together? Down the hall? I mean, you weren't separated, were you?
Separated how? Like shooters, non-shooters?
No, just all the shooters were put in a different classroom or were separated one from another?
We were just all standing in the hallway.
Okay, so you were together?
Correct.
Was anybody asking you any questions as to what happened? Any of your supervisors?
No.
Okay. How long were you in that middle school that night?
I don't recall the exact time that I was in there. I want to say we left somewhere around 5 o'clock in the morning.
Do you know what time this happened about?
I have no idea.
I told you around 11, would that sound okay?
I know it was dark, it was night. Again, I believe I said earlier, we usually took our lunch at 10 or 10:30. So, yes.
So, my point being, sir, is that you were in that middle school for at least 5 hours. Long time, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you were together with all the other shooters at that point, correct?
Yes.
And nobody asked you any questions?
No.
You never talked to an East Cleveland detective?
Not that night, no.
You never talked to anybody from BCI?
Not that night.
Did any of your supervisors want to get a guarantee statement from you at that point?
No.
So what were you doing there for 5 hours in the hallway of the middle school?
Basically standing there.
And no conversations were going on?
I don't recall conversations. We might have been talking to each other, but for the most part, we were quiet.
I just want to make sure I understand. You go through a horrific experience like this, and then you're all together for 5 hours and you're not talking about it.
Right.
Okay. So again, if you would be able to read your BCI statement, page 37, gentlemen, regarding what you might have talked about in the middle school. I think if you read your statement, that refresh your recollection.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. Can I coach Ryan? Sure. If you could read that for a sec. Does that refresh your recollection, sir?
It does.
Question is, what was your conversation, the course of the conversation? Your answer was?
Just talking about what we experienced.
So, there were conversations about what occurred, you just can't recall it. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, that night, yes, I would say there were conversations. Like I said, we were joking around with each other, trying to cheer each other up. We know what we went through.
Alleviate the tension?
A little bit, but like I said, I don't recall the conversations. For the most part, we were quiet.
Now, being on the force only 5 months, did you ever discharge your weapon before?
During training.
No, on the job.
No.
When you were shooting here, do you think you hit your target?
I hope so. I have no
Going
idea.
backwards?
I have no idea.
How about when you're behind the the driver front side of his car? You think you hit your target?
Again, I hope so. I have no idea.
And again, what were you aiming at?
I was aiming at the driver.
And that's right here.
Correct.
So after you stayed at the middle school for those 5+ hours, together with the other shooters, and nobody talked to you, what happened next?
We had to go turn in our weapons to homicide.
State's Exhibit 5, Your Honor. May I approach, Your Honor?
Please.
Sure, I'm going to show it's marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit number 5. I don't know if you can identify this or not, but can you identify that? First of all, what is it for the record?
It's a Glock 17 semi-auto handgun.
Is that at least the kind of weapons that CPD issues you guys?
It is.
And can you recognize that as yours or not?
I know that's mine by the serial number.
Okay. Is this the gun that you had that night?
It is.
Is this the gun that you discharged 4 times?
It is.
Okay.
So we're at the point in time, it's a long night, long morning. Where did you go after you left the middle school? You said you went where again?
We went to homicide to turn in our weapons.
And that was the weapon you just identified.
Correct.
Anything else happen when you went downtown?
Not that I recall.
Was your picture taken?
The picture was taken at the middle school.
Oh, that's where the pictures were taken.
Correct.
Okay. And do you know whose pictures were taken that night at the middle school? Do you know?
I don't recall exactly who. I know mine. I know a couple other people that were shooters. Theirs were taken, but other than that, I don't know everybody's that was taken.
Who was taking the pictures?
I don't recall exactly who it was.
Well, let me ask you this. Who was in charge at that point? Who was telling you what to do, what not to do? Who was kind of in charge of the whole scene at that point? Do you know?
Initially, one of the sergeants was the one that separated us. That was Sergeant Coleman. After that, I don't recall exactly who was giving us direction.
Were any type of water, refreshments given to you at that point?
Yes, once we made it inside of the middle school, water and donuts were brought to us.
And who did that for you guys?
Our union representatives.
Did you see your union representatives on the scene?
I did.
And who would that have been?
I saw Steve Kindness there.
And who was your president at that point?
Jeff Fulmer.
Was he on the scene?
I don't recall seeing him there.
And in this picture, I believe there was a chief there. Do you remember seeing the chief?
I don't remember seeing the chief.
Okay. Okay. So you got donuts and water, and then where did you go after that? After you left the middle school and you went downtown, handed your gun, and what did you do? By the way, did you drive down back? Did you move your car to go back downtown?
Yes, our car was not inside the area that was sectioned off, so we were able to take our car.
So you actually moved the car from where it was?
Correct.
Nobody told you to keep it there?
No.
By the way, were there any other cars in this area? From here to here, if you remember.
Don't recall. I want to say there was another car right directly to the right of us. I learned it later that there was for sure, but I don't remember if I knew that at the time that it was there.
Okay. And again, I apologize for the answers. You don't remember any police officers on the side of this car?
I do not.
Do you remember any police officers up here?
I do not.
Next to the car?
The only one that I remember seeing there was Farley, and that was when I moved up to the rear of Zone Car 238.
How about on the hill?
I don't recall seeing anybody on the hill.
Remember seeing any police cars up here?
I don't.
Okay, sir, where did you, by the way, from that photo, can you recognize anybody in there that you know?
No, I can't.
Okay. Can you see it okay? Do you want to come down and look closer?
To the right, it's kind of blurry, so it's a little hard to see people. To the left, I'd say it's a little bit clearer, but
So you don't recognize, yeah, these faces are, but you don't recognize anybody there?
I don't.
Okay.
You can look at it on this one if you want, if that's any easier, different or no.
I think it's the same. To the right, it's blurry, and to the left, I can't really tell.
So you don't know who this guy is right in the middle in the white shirt?
No, I don't.
The guy next to him with the stripes?
No.
So you and Officer Farley drove down in your car, left from the scene, to put your guns in, correct?
To turn them into homicide, correct.
Then what did you do?
After we were finished at homicide, we went to the CPPA hall.
And who was all there?
I remember myself, Farley, Officer Brelo, Officer Almeida, and other than that, I believe Officer Demchek, and that's the only ones I can remember.
Were there more than those people in the...
I don't recall. Those are the ones I remembered seeing.
And what was the purpose of you going to the Union Hall at that point?
To kind of just calm down, de-stress.
Did you have a conversation with Officer Brelo?
I don't know that it was a conversation, but I do recall briefly talking to him.
And could you tell the court what that brief conversation was?
I don't recall the exact words, but it was more or less to the effect that I was the one that jumped up on the hood of the car.
Did you ask, who said that?
Officer Brelo.
Did you ask him who was on the hood?
I did not.
He offered that to you?
From what I recall.
He said, I was on the hood.
Correct.
What was your response?
I said, oh.
You didn't say, holy crap, I almost shot you?
No, I didn't. I didn't even talk about it.
And that conversation lasted how long?
It was very brief.
10 seconds?
That's fair to say.
Did you know Officer Brelo before this?
I knew who he was. We knew each other, but we weren't, I wouldn't say we were very familiar with each other.
Colleagues?
Yes.
Fellow officers?
Correct.
Seen him around?
Correct.
You see him in the courtroom today?
Correct.
Please point him out for the court.
Sitting right over there.
Okay, wait a second. Skip the ID? Thank you. Thank you, officer. Right. So you had no follow-up conversation after Officer Brelo admitted to you that he was on the hood?
I don't recall having one.
Okay. Now, he didn't say the trunk, he said the hood, correct?
Correct.
And his emotional state at that point was what?
I would say it was the same as mine. Still pretty excited. Still pretty nervous.
Okay. How long did you stay at the Union Hall?
I don't recall what time I left.
And did you have conversations with any individuals at the Union Hall about what occurred?
I don't recall if we did or not. I'm sure we did, but I don't recall the exact conversations.
So you don't recall whether you had these conversations with other individuals at that point?
I recall talking to people, but I don't recall what the conversations were about.
Would it be fair to say you were talking about the events that occurred that night?
It would.
You weren't talking about the Browns at that point?
We may have been talking about the Browns as well.
Then you're really desperate at that point, aren't you?
I'm trying to talk about something different.
Right. Before you talked to Officer Brelo and him admitting to you that he was on the hood, had you known that he was on the hood before? before that?
I knew that there was an officer on the hood. I didn't know it was him.
Any of your conversations you had at the playground or inside the middle school, that issue never came up?
The first I heard of it was at the Union Hall.
And how long were you at the Union Hall?
I don't recall.
At some point in time you went home?
Actually, I went to my parents' house.
Okay. Did you take any pictures when you were at the scene?
I did not.
Did you talk to anybody or text anybody on your cell phone when you were on the scene?
I did. After a while, I was able to go back to the car to grab my cell phone. That was probably before sometime soon before we left. I had received a few text messages from other officers that had heard that I had been involved, and they had asked how I was doing, and my only response was, "I'm okay, thanks for asking."
So you had no conversations on your cell phone, just texts?
Correct.
Okay. When you went home, what'd you do when you got home?
Well, like I said, when I left the Union Hall, I went to my parents' house, and I had already called my father and explained to him that I was involved in this incident, and said, as soon as I can, I'll come and talk to you and Mom, but don't say anything to Mom because my mom worries about me and the job, and I wanted to explain it to her myself.
When did that phone call take place?
Sometime before we left, but early in the morning.
So you went home and you talked to your parents about what occurred?
Correct.
Okay. Did you get your mom upset?
She was upset.
So you go home, talk to your parents, then what happens?
Eventually I made it home.
Go to sleep?
I tried to.
Okay. And as a result of you being involved in a shooting, were you on duty? Were you on duty the next day then? What happened?
No, I wasn't. We were placed on administrative leave for 3 days.
How many days?
3.
Did you have an opportunity to talk to your FTO Farley after that day?
I did.
And how long after the November 29th and the morning of the 30th did you talk to Officer Farley?
I don't recall the exact day, but I'm pretty sure I talked to him the next day.
Okay. And did you talk about your experiences that occurred?
I don't recall exactly what we talked about. Again, it's 2.5 years ago.
Okay. Did you indicate to Officer Farley you saw Officer Brelo on the trunk?
I did.
Did you?
I indicated that I saw him on the hood of the suspect car.
Thank you for correcting me. Did Officer Farley have the same recollection as you?
He did not.
So you were both right here, right? You both were seeing the same thing, correct?
Correct.
But Officer Farley's version was different than yours.
Correct.
Was that discussion amicable or was it heated?
I wouldn't say it was heated. We definitely disagreed with each other. We thought the other person was wrong with what we saw.
That didn't affect your relationship with him, did it?
Absolutely not.
And to this day?
No.
Still have a good relationship with him?
Yes.
Even though you disagree as to version of events that would occur?
Friends disagree all the time.
So does family, right?
Correct.
And what was the major disagreement between you two?
The major disagreement was what I saw and what Officer Farley saw. I don't recall if it was Officer Farley saw a person on the trunk or the hood of Zone Car 238.
238.
Correct.
He wasn't talking about the trunk of 217, was he?
No.
So your disagreement was if somebody was here or somebody was here?
Correct.
Would that be a fair statement?
Yes.
And would it be a fair statement till to this day you still disagree on this?
I think to this day we have come to the conclusion that we were both right.
Okay. And there come a point in time where you remember being talked to by BCI?
Yes.
about this incident?
Yes.
Do you remember the date?
I do not.
Do you remember how long after the shooting it was?
Not the exact time. I want to say it was a couple weeks, but I don't recall the exact
Okay.
amount of time.
So it was a short time afterwards, correct?
Correct.
At some point in time, sir, besides talking to your parents and Officer Farley, did you talk to anybody else about what you saw that night?
I don't recall.
Union attorney? Did you talk to Mr. D'Angelo, right, sitting right here?
Eventually I did.
He was your union attorney at that point, correct?
Correct.
And he represented you, correct?
Correct.
In fact, he was with you at the BCI interview, correct?
He was.
Anybody else with you at the BCI interview?
Steve Kindness was there, and I believe Jeff Fulmer was there, but I don't recall.
So
The two I remember.
Jeff Fulmer was the president, correct?
Yes, correct.
And who else was there?
Steve Kindness, the vice president.
And he's the vice president?
Correct.
And Mr. D'Angelo, correct?
Correct.
All right. Did you talk to Mr. Kindness and Mr. Fulmer about what you saw that night before you went to BCI?
I did.
Did you tell them everything you're telling the court today?
I did.
Okay. And when you went there, that was a voluntary statement, correct?
It was.
Nobody forced you there, did they?
No, not at all.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Sir, if I told you December 5th of 2013 was your BCI interview, would you disagree with me, or would that be something that...
I honestly don't recall. If that's what it is, that's what it is.
Okay, this happened on November 29th, December 5th, within a week, right? Does that sound correct?
I thought it was longer than that, but
Okay. Now, sir, show me the marked states exhibit number 47. Do you recognize that document, sir?
I do.
Is any markings by you on that?
Yes.
Okay. Where is that? If you could come down with the court's indulgence.
Sure.
I have some questions on this, Your Honor. Here you go, officer. Just don't touch the screen. Don't whack anything. Where are your markings?
What's in blue? Right here.
Is that your initials?
Those are.
And your badge number?
Correct.
In fact, sir, you've talked to me a couple times, correct?
Correct.
And we've gone over this map, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what is this marking right here? What does that mean? What does that signify?
The rectangle is our zone car. And then the line going around the zone car is the direction I took once I got outside of the zone car.
But there's no from here, see I did it, to here. Is that your marking right there?
Well, if it is, it's covered by that hand.
Right.
I don't recall.
I mean, there's a blue mark there.
I believe that's where I said, I stated before that I said I believe I made it up to here.
Right. Is there anything different on this after you sit back and thinking about this that you would change on this map as to any of the placement that you put yourself?
No, the only thing I would say is that I think over time it's become more clear that I did make it up to behind zone cars with 38, and I would definitely want that. But other than that, it's
So you still think the cars back here is out further?
I think it's closer, but I knew we were right around this little turn right here.
Mm-hmm. So if your car, do you think your car was closer than this?
I believe that our car was about 40, 50 feet away.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, can you see that that right there, did you write that down?
I did not.
So it says 12/5/2012, Brian Cibola. You would not disagree with that writing?
I don't know who wrote that, but I didn't.
Okay.
Well, as already said, if you tell him he's not disputing
Right.
it was December 5th.
Thank you, Your Honor. And sir, you told BCI essentially what you testified today?
Yes.
Now, sir, there come a point in time that you were subpoenaed to the grand jury?
Yes.
And did you voluntarily submit to a grand jury questioning?
I did not.
Okay, at some point, what happened?
Well, hold on one second. I didn't hear the reason for the objection.
There was a motion in the limit that we filed that she was granted relative to assertion of constitutional rights.
Well, I think if I remember that motion, it was to argue that somehow they were culpable because they served their rights. But if he wants to get into the question of did you give another statement and when you did, was it more or less accurate, he can get into the circumstance of the statement. Putting that aside, I'm aware through things outside of the evidence of what transpired. So, for now, at least, the objection is overruled, but there may be some objectionable questions. Of course, we don't know.
Well, I'll be more specific, sir. Based upon the advice of Mr. D'Angelo, did you not take the Fifth Amendment before you testified in front of the grand jury?
It wasn't based on his advice.
Okay. You decided on your own?
No, it was based on my lawyer, Henry Hilo's advice.
Okay. But you were then at some point granted immunity, correct?
Correct.
And that's why you testified today, correct?
Correct.
Because you have immunity.
Correct.
Did you think you did anything wrong on that night?
Absolutely not.
Now, regarding all the other officers, you couldn't tell us whether they acted in conformity with their training because you didn't see them. Isn't that correct?
I'd say that's a fair statement.
Because what you described today, you kind of had, for lack of a better word, tunnel vision, correct?
Correct.
You couldn't tell us anything else but the scene that was right in front of you.
Correct.
In fact, Officer Brelo was in that tunnel vision of yours, was he not?
At one point, yes.
Sir, to your knowledge, has any other officer who has been involved with the shooting or around there, to your knowledge, were able to tell the investigators that Officer Brelo was on that hood?
Not to my, the only other person that said they saw Officer Brelo was Farley, and again, it wasn't on the hood. It was either on the trunk or the hood of his own car, not the suspect car.
So, at this point, you realize you're the only officer who puts Officer Brelo on the hood?
If that's what you're telling me, that I am the only one, then yes, I realize
You
that.
know of anybody else?
No one has ever said otherwise.
Let's make sure we're correct here. Officer Farley puts him on the trunk, correct?
Or the hood. I don't recall. It was one or the trunk or the hood of the zone car, never on the suspect car.
Okay. So my question is, as you sit here today, you understand you're the only officer that puts it on the hood of this car?
Again, if that's what you're I've never looked at anybody else's statements. I've never watched anybody else's interviews. If that's what you're telling me, then yes, I realize that.
Sir, have you had any type of pressure put on you to change your testimony?
Never.
Has anybody treated you differently regarding your job on the job because of this?
Not at all.
And what you're telling us today, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, you cannot recall any conversation specifically when you're at the playground, correct?
Correct.
When you're in the middle school,
Correct.
and when you're at the union hall.
Correct.
No conversations you can tell this court with specificity that you had with other officers.
Other than what I've already stated about Officer Brelo, yes, that is correct.
So when you found that out, Officer Brelo was admitted to you that he was the one that was on the hood, the one you almost shot, okay? Did you tell that to any of the officers?
I don't recall.
So you don't recall whether you said, holy crap, whoever?
To the language, you mean?
That means it has to be 17 times.
Well, the redundancy, it is true, it is redundant, but
It is correct.
Unless you're quoting a witness, you should probably try to keep to a certain level of language in the court.
I'm sorry, Your Honors. Sir, the point that I was getting at is you want the court today to believe the fact that from 2.5 years ago, and immediately right after, you never had any discussions with any police officers except Officer Farley that you almost shot Officer Brelo on the hood.
What I said was, I'm not saying that conversations didn't happen. I don't recall the conversations.
Thank you, Officer Farley. No further questions. Officer Cibulnik. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Sir, you are subject to being cross-examined here today, but that will happen in about 15 minutes. But now we're going to take a break. You're welcome to step down. You can't discuss your testimony with anybody, and we'll see you at 5 till, I guess. Thank you. We're off the record.